other gigantic force in this is the idea of globalization. Now, globalization, of course, has been going on ever since the first people got in their ships going out looking for new trade markets. It's nothing that new. It's just that it has been accelerating recently. And it particularly came into the public consciousness, at least in America, in 2001 when Thomas Friedman published a book called The World is Flat. And in that book, Friedman talks about 10 flatteners, things that he said are flattening the world. And they're all the things on the outer circle. And he said all of these things work in what he called a triple convergence, the three things happening in the middle. These are the things that really give the energy, the warm water to that perfect storm that I was talking about. For those of you who read A Whole New Mind, you know that they're also very tied to the things that Pink mentions in there. Pink breaks down the things that are happening in the world to what he calls the 3 A's. And they are abundance, Asia, and automation. Abundance, I don't need to talk about. We see that around us all the time. Automation, I'll talk about a little bit through the course of this. For right now, I want to focus on Asia. You know, China was in the news all this summer because of the Olympics. Maybe some of you saw Ted Koppel's program on the Discovery Channel this summer. This is one of the key quotations that came out of that show. Some of what's happening in terms of our market relationship with China and India and other nations is simply a matter of numbers. When you're talking about this stuff, size really does matter. Okay? Think of it this way. If someone tells you that you're 1 in a million, you feel pretty good about yourself. You know, I'm something special. I'm just 1 in a million. That means in India there's 1,100 yous. Right? In China there's 1,300 yous. To put this another way, in China, 25% of the people who have the highest IQs is equal roughly to the population of North America. Now, some of this, though, is not just size. As Friedman talks about, it also has to do with cultural values. And this is how he explains it. He says that in China, their Bill Gates is Bill Gates. As that in America, our Bill Gates is Now, we have to think about how some of this has played out over the past several years. China, we know, 1.3 billion people. But here's some other interesting statistics. It's expected that by 2010, 500 million of them will be in the middle class. There are 300,000 millionaires in China, and in 2006, China became the #1 nation in the IPO market with profits of $56.5 billion. Remember what China's economic and political system was just a few decades ago. This is the fastest in history that any nation has accumulated so much wealth. India's economy continues to grow at 8% a year. In the last decade, they have lifted more people out of poverty than there are residents in Western Europe. They've done it primarily through education. In the last 2 decades, each decade they have raised their literacy rate 13%. And it's expected that by 2030, they'll be the 3rd largest economy in the world. Now, we always hear about them. They're in the news. Those aren't the only nations that are making moves like this. 2 of the fastest growing economies in the world are Finland and Ireland. And it has happened mainly because of how they have changed their educational systems to focus on innovation and creativity. Ethiopia recently put a fiber optic network across its entire nation so it could allow its citizens to tap into this. And India is now actually worried about outsourcing going to Ghana. I read something the other night, and I can't remember the guy's name, but the story was very telling about what's happening. It had to do with people developing innovative energy solutions. And this guy was a spokesman for the American firms, and they were trying to get business from a European consortium in this area. And the European looked at the American representative and said, no, we're not going to give you that work. We'll send you our manufacturing jobs, but we're going to keep all our innovation over here because this is where it's all happening. And he said, you need to realize that you have become the new India. It's no wonder. There's a guy named James Rogers. I don't know if you've ever heard of him. You probably have heard of his partner, George Soros. James Rogers said, you know what? I'm taking all my granddaughter's savings and I'm investing them overseas. Pink and Friedman based most of their ideas on scenes like this. The outsourcing of automated production jobs and increased connectivity. Their work is very, very anecdotal, and they focused on the spread of these things, but not necessarily the depth. And even though Pink talks about empathy being one of the six senses, they pretty much ignore scenes like this. Pink at one point even talks about things like this being a necessary byproduct of what happens. The simple fact of the matter is, when it comes to economics, and more importantly, when it comes to quality of life, the world is not, despite what we've been told, becoming flatter. In fact, it really looks kind of like this close-up of a flower. And it's becoming increasingly spiky, with higher and higher peaks and deeper valleys. And to really get a sense of that, we have to look at the work of a guy named Richard Florida from the University of Toronto. His work is not anecdotal. His work is strictly data-based. And Florida, when he talks at the end of this quotation about these relatively small number of locations, he's talking about what he calls megaregions. And here's the easiest way for me to explain what a megaregion is to you in terms that will really strike home for you. A megaregion is Texas on this map. It's where the quality of life is happening, and it's where everything that's worthwhile is happening, and everything else is just kind of on the periphery. Florida really likes maps, so I'm going to use some maps to illustrate what he's talking about and then explain the essential concepts and implications to you. Here are the megaregions in North America. Here are the megaregions in Europe. Here they are throughout Asia. Now these next three maps, really watch what happens. I hope you can make them out all right. Here's how population is distributed throughout the world. You can see the peaks and valleys kind of where you would expect them. Here's economic activity throughout the world. Here's innovation and higher quality of life.